The Past Happenings, A Pioneer Woman's Journey Through Hardship and Hope. Memoirs of Roseanne Gregg Harper. Written in 1934. Transcribed and edited by her great-grandson, K.R. Harper, M.D. I suppose it would be appropriate to begin my story by providing a brief account of who I am and what this story is about. As I have already mentioned, my name is Roseanne Gregg Harper. The stories contained within these pages have either been passed down to me by my great-grandmother, grandfather, mother, and father, or are events that I have personally lived and witnessed. I call this collection The Past Happenings. It is thanks to my great-grandson, Dr. Kenneth Harper, who took the time to preserve my writings in digital form, that these memories will continue to live on. It is my hope that through these pages you will come to understand how the life you enjoy today was built upon the sacrifices, hardships, and daily struggles of those who came before you, people who faced countless trials and tribulations simply to survive. The Indian Raids. My grandmother and father were born in Missouri. Their ancestors came from Ulster, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Grandmother's name was Rebecca Cox. Grandfather's name was Jeremiah Gregg. There were 3 Gregg uncles and several Coxes who lived near Salt Lick Rock in Spring. If any don't know where that is, write to the Historical Society in St. Louis, Missouri. I can't tell what county because I have no map, but Cox lived 12 miles from the Missouri River, and my grandfather 1 mile where he was born. The Indians had made a raid on the settlers, killing some and driving off their horses. All of the men that were able to go followed them, and 1 Cox boy and my grandfather went with them. They had been gone 2 days when Mrs. Cox and Patsy's brother and Patsy went 2 miles from the house to gather berries to dry and preserve. Mrs. Cox rode Patsy's pet mare and found the berries. They started picking. After a while, they became so focused on picking berries they got separated, the boy in one thicket and Patsy in another. They were not afraid because they thought the Indians were gone. I suppose that was the Indian strategy, to lure away the men, leaving those left behind vulnerable. And it worked. All at once, Mrs. Cox heard a shot. She raised up and saw her boy down and the Indians after Patsy. They caught Patsy, put her on her pet horse, tied her feet and hands under the horse, and with the chief pulling on the bridle, they left in a trot. They were on foot, and she counted 15 of them. The mother went to see if her boy was dead. He was. What awful feeling she had, her boy dead and her girl a prisoner. She ran all the way home and found the father and her other boy killed. Oh, it was terrible. She didn't know what to do, for it was 12 miles to a neighbor's house. She pulled her dead back to the porch wall and covered them from the flies. She could only wait a while for someone to come. She fell down by them and fainted, but thought she had gone to sleep. Well, the men and scouts who were chasing the first bunch of Indians followed them to the mountains, where they scattered. They tried to trail them, but they never gathered together again, so they started back. When they got back near the settlement, the men parted, and Jerry and the Cox boy went on to the Coxes, where they found Mr. Cox and the 2 boys slain, and Patsy carried off a prisoner. Grandpa felt a whirlwind of emotions. He and Patsy were building a house, and were planning to get married as soon as it was finished. He knew he had to rally the men to bury the dead and rescue her. Time was of the essence. If she was still alive, the Indians might hide her in the mountains, and he feared he'd never find her. Mrs. Cox informed them that 15 Indians were moving together in a specific direction. By midnight, he gathered men, horses, and supplies. They rode swiftly until they reached a stream where the horses could drink. There, they discovered the fresh Indian trail, knowing they were close. As they crossed a prairie, they spotted the Indians scattered ahead. But what about Patsy? She remained calm, trusting that Jerry and the scouts would come for her. The chief untied her and allowed her to drink, then let her walk around. He even let her horse graze. Patsy sat under a tree, and one of the Indians offered her dried venison. After another drink, the chief pointed to her mare, and she stood up. They didn't tie her this time. She understood that any attempt to escape would mean death. They began to trot, moving from the woods onto a prairie where the tall grass obscured her view. Following a stock trail, the Indians approached the distant woods. The mare, eager to graze, slowed down, causing the chief to fall behind. Then the chief saw the men coming. Suddenly, he jerked Patsy off the mare, striking her head with a tomahawk, and split 3 ribs before fleeing. But the scouts caught up, killing him and the other 15. They returned to find the mare, but where was Patsy? They discovered a trail of blood and followed it, finding her fainted from blood loss just 200 feet from the trail. Jerry lifted her onto his saddle in front of him. They traveled slowly, reaching the stream before dark. As dusk fell, they made camp, piling saddles and covering them with blankets for Patsy to rest against. They offered her a drink and did their best to make her comfortable.
Patsy, just lie here and try to sleep.
Jerry, I am in so much pain. I don't think I can sleep. You put your blanket beside me so I can touch you if I hear a noise.
I'm not going anywhere. I'll be right here beside you.
At dawn, she heard birds twittering. She touched Jerry, and the men got up. Some made a fire, and the others rounded up the horses and saddled them. They made coffee, fried bacon, and bread. Jerry gave her some coffee, but she couldn't eat. She already had a fever from her wounds. "Get me home soon, please." They carried Patsy in the house and put her on the bed. She fainted, and when she awoke, found her mother and neighbors had cut off her blood-soaked clothes, washed her, and put poultices of brown sugar soaked in turpentine. They bound her head and bandaged her ribs tightly. There were no doctors nearer than St. Louis. They had no medicine but what they made for themselves. Well, she gradually improved, and after a year she was able to take care of a house, so she and Jerry were married. In another year, my father, Jeremiah Gregg, was born. They named him after his father. He was born on March 24th, 1813. The Indians hadn't made a raid in 3 years. I guess they were scared of the soldiers at the fort on the other side of the river, just a mile from their house. When there was trouble, or if the soldiers came across to hunt, they had to use a ferry. There wasn't a bridge. Now, at this time, Patsy was weaning her son, my dad. He was crying for milk. There were lots of cattle, but they were very wild. Grandpa Jerry saw a cow and a young calf coming up beside the Stake and Rider field fence. Some of you may know this as a Virginia zigzag fence. Forgetting his gun, he ran to head her off the trail into the cow pen. As he went to turn the corner, he saw Indians following her. He ran back, but they shot him through the heart. He fell in her arms, and she pulled him inside, shut the door, got the gun, and shot 2 of the Indians. The soldiers at the fort heard the shots and screams, but had to ferry across the river. They ran to the house, but the Indians were gone. She asked if they had found any dead. She told them she had shot 2, for she saw them fall. The soldiers said she might have killed them, but they always carry off their dead. Poor girl, she didn't know what to do. With her husband gone, she had to make her own living. Someone sent milk until some of the kin caught a cow. She stayed there and worked, raising some chickens, a garden, and a small patch of corn and cotton. The soldiers followed the Indians but didn't catch them. The Indians were quiet and hadn't made a raid in 2 or 3 years. The last raid was on Jerry's Uncle William's family. The Indians shot fire on their roof and burned them all but one boy, who was away at the time. That house was in sight of Patsy's home. Luckily, he had gone on the Santa Fe Trail with my cousin Josiah Gregg. In case you don't know who he was, Dr. Josiah Gregg was a well-known explorer/trailblazer who wrote the book Commerce of the Prairie. Today, it is used as a college textbook. It remains the cornerstone for all studies of the Santa Fe Trail. Anyway, he got back home the day after the raid and found his home and family just gone. I can't even imagine. He must have been filled with grief, anger, and maybe guilt. Anyway, he left and was not heard of after that. Father takes a wife and moves to Texas. My father was a healthy boy and a hard worker. He helped his mother, and together they both had made a good life. They lived alone until he was 17 years old. He had taken in more land, bought a yoke of oxen, and a good wagon. He worked for other people when he had no work at home. He would go to church on Sundays and to singing with the other young people. About this time, a man by the name of Ben Norris and his boy came to board with them. The boy and Jerry were the same age, and for whatever reason, neither liked the other. So when my grandmother wanted to marry Mr. Norris, my father became very upset. He told his mother,
"I can't abide this marriage, Mom. That boy is no account, and I can't stand to be around either of them."
Jerry, I wish you wouldn't say such things. Please stop.
her husband Jeremiah has been dead now for nearly 19 years. I think she was just lonely from not having a companion, he said.
"Don't do this, Mom. I'm begging you. Look, here's what I'm gonna say. If they go, I will stay, and I promise I will make us a good living. If you get married, then I swear on my father's grave I'll leave you behind."
You must do what you must do, Jerry, and so do I. I wish you'd reconsider, son.
"I've said my piece."
Patsy and Mr. Norris got married anyway. I'm sure she hated for Jerry to go in this manner, but I believe she knew that Jerry needed to strike out on his own. So he took both yoke of oxen, his tools, plows, and everything to work with, his clothes, bedding, and the wagon, with enough groceries and feed to do him till he got to Kansas. He drove away without saying goodbye. There is a time for all things, and it was time for Jeremiah to find his own way. There was a girl a ways from their home. Polly was her name, Mary Polly Smeltzer. She was 17. He had met her while working in the area, I guess. He asked Polly to marry him. They talked a spell, and he shared his plans with her. He asked her father if they could be married. The old man asked,
"What does she say?"
My father told him yes, she wanted to. So Polly's father replied,
"Well, you are both healthy, but you are young. I suppose it's okay with me. Just promise me you'll take good care of her."
He knew that father was a hard worker and would make a good husband for his daughter. They were married that night and left the next day for Kansas. There he got work with a stonemason and learned the trade. He worked there for several years and raised 3 girls, Rebecca, Melissa, and Alice. There were 2 others, but the children died in infancy or were born dead. Then they moved to St. Louis, where they all took a raging fever that was going over the country. The girls finally got well, but his wife, Polly, died. Soon after this, some of the Coxes and Greggs came by on their way to Texas. They were all young. They wanted my dad to go with them. Since Polly died, he thought it was time for a change. He concluded to go with them. Mary Polly Smeltzer, 1810 to 1849. She was 39 years old. The government was giving 160 acres of land to settlers. They had to live on it for 5 years, work on it, make a field, and fence it. They got there and each preempted 160 acres. At the end of 5 years, they would get a deed to their land. Father lived on his land for some time, but wanted to get nearer to Austin. He sold that preemption to another settler who was to live out the rest of the time. At that time, Austin was just a village of shacks, a store or 2, and the state capitol building. He found some land near Travis Peak, the highest mountain in Travis County, where he preempted another 160 acres. He met another lady by the name of Margaret Bratton and married again. Alice and Melissa, his daughters, married doctors, but both died later on. Rebecca married Alf Collier. He lived in this place for several years, where 2 boys, William and John, were born in February 1851. Later, a girl, Eunice, was born there. At that time, Indians were killing men who were hunting stock that had wandered away from home. His wife had no close neighbors and wanted to get nearer to town so the children could go to school. He sold this home, bought quite a bunch of sheep, about 1,800, 2 workhorses, and a shotgun. He moved to Onion Creek, about 7 miles from Austin, in a settlement where the Harpers, Scotts, and several other families lived. He improved his home and hired a Mexican herder for the sheep so the boys could go to school. He built pens and sheds so he could shelter his sheep and cows from winter blizzards. These old settlers knew how to make a good living from the land. They hunted and killed wild cattle for their hides and tallow, deer, and sometimes buffalo. They trapped wolves, beavers, and other wild animals for their pelts. They robbed bee trees for honey. If a man found a bee tree, he would mark his brand on it if he was not ready to cut it, and no one else would cut that tree. They had plenty of hogs and cured hams and bacon and rendered out lard. They gathered pecans for market and even sold dried fruit. The neighbors would all join together and load up their ox wagons and go to Indianola, the shipping port, to sell their loads. The government would load them with supplies for the western forts. Old Man Scott, at the time of this trip, was not at home. He was visiting his son, Frank Scott, up on Johnson Creek, near the Llano River. There were 6 wagons. Some had 4 yoke of oxen, some had 2, and others 3. Father had 2 yoke of oxen, and another had only 1. Grandpa Frank Harper, my future father-in-law, told me about this. We think he was on the trip. They started on that long, rough road. The roads had started as stock trails and had never been worked. When they found a rock too big to go over, they all stopped, rolled it out of the way, and went on. It was warm for fall weather. After 2 days of travel, they reached a prairie. They camped about halfway across on the 4th night. During the night, a blizzard blew up. They had no wood, not a thing to make fires with except dry cow chips and buffalo chips. They drove their wagons close together to ward off the icy wind and snow. They carried all the chips they could find and stacked them under the wagons. The first night, 2 oxen died. That left 1 man with a wagon that was not very good. They divided his load and then cut the wagon up for firewood. They tied the rest of the oxen on the south side of their camp and fed them. The storm lasted 3 days, and then it went to raining. That made the roads boggy. Well, they finally got to Indianola, where they could have gotten a wagon, but there was no oxen to buy. They sold their produce at good prices, loaded their wagons with government supplies, and divided the man's load on their wagons. They knew that when they got back to San Antonio, they could buy both oxen and wagons, and they did. They went on to Eagle Pass on the Rio Grande. They had a rough time, for they had to guard against attacks by the Indians and Mexicans. They unloaded part of their freight there, and then turned north for 100 miles to the fort, where they left part of their load, and then turned east another 100 miles to Fort Farrell. I may be wrong about the name. It might be Fort Tarrant. Anyway, they unloaded all they had and were paid. The man who had lost his team and wagon was paid for them by the government, because it was hard to get anyone to bring food and supplies. It was too dangerous. They were 5 days returning to their home in Austin. All was well when they got there. After resting a few days, Father concluded he would cut a lot of large timber to make a barn. On cutting the last tree, it began to sway a little, so he gave it the last 2 strokes and stepped back, then saw his wife Margaret coming up the trail.
It begins to pop and crack. The tree is falling.
Margaret, get back.
She started back, but a large limb caught her. He ran to see. She was alive but unconscious. He saw he would have to cut the limb into pieces to get her out. After he freed her, he carried her to the house, put her on the bed, and ran to the Harpers to get someone to stay with her until he could get a doctor. The doctor came and examined her. Her hip bone was smashed to pieces. He said,
I can't do a thing. All I can do is give her something to ease her pain.
You see, there is another complication. She's pregnant.
The baby is still alive, but if I fix her hip, it would kill the baby, and that is against the law. When the baby comes, I can place the bones, and she will get well.
So the poor thing lay there for 4 months. He got one of the Harpers to stay there with her while he went for the doctor. But when they got back, the baby was already born. She died and left 6 children to care for. Father and the boys did the washing. Elizabeth cared for the house and baby. We'll leave Father and his story for now, but allow me to introduce you to my mother's story. Her name is Mary Ann MacDonald. In 1837, my grandparents on my mother's side moved to Lavaca, Texas, where they ran a cider press, saloon, eating house, and dance hall combined. They lived there 1 year when my mother was born, Mary Ann MacDonald, and at which time her mother passed away. Her name was Polly MacDonald. Her father came from Scotland, and her mother was Pennsylvania Dutch. It seemed uncanny that such a mite as my mother, 1 pound and 2 ounces, could live, suffer, and die at such an advanced age. At birth, her mother's sister put her in a basket of wool, which was heated with stones. They fed her with a goose quill wrapped with a clean, soft cloth. When she was 1 year old, her father married again. She was a black-eyed, red-cheeked baby, healthy and strong, but small. She lived with her aunt, Sarah Colbraith, until she was 6 years old. Then her aunt died, and she went to live with her father and stepmother. She had 2 half-sisters to carry about and to care for. Time went on. She only got a day's schooling now and then. When she was 10 years old, she did most of the housework and cared for the young ones. There were 3 girls and 1 boy. When she was 11 years old, there were 3 girls and 2 boys to care for. Her sisters were Lou, Minerva, and Sarah. The boys were named Henry and Jesse. With the children living next door to the saloon and dance hall, it was natural for them to see and hear many things other children never heard at that time and day. My mother learned to be self-reliant and learned to dance like the little sprite she was. At 16, she was supposed to be old enough to marry and had a lot of sweethearts among the frontier men and travelers who stopped over for a rest. When she was only 9 years old, she was dancing to entertain them. At one time, there were 3 men, professional dancers from California, who bet that they could beat her dancing. Her father bet if they danced the steps first, she could dance them and show them some new ones. So they danced 3 nights in succession. Her father was very strict, and he said, "If you let them beat you, I will whip you, girl, so watch close." She watched and caught the steps and danced them. When they had danced all they knew, she knew 8. They didn't know, so her father won $500, and they gave her 3 bars of silver to make rings and necklaces. But her father kept it all, and she never knew what he did with them. At the age of 16, she married Frank Scott, a hunter and Indian fighter. He had come to see his people who lived in the same settlement. They met at a dance, fell in love, and married. He had 1 horse, a saddle, a lariat, and a blanket. She had a bed, a quilt, a pot to cook in, a coffee pot, and a skillet to bake in. As the country was settling fast, they took what they had, and her father gave her 1 yoke of oxen, an axe, a saw, and an old cart. They moved to Kerr County to the present site of the town of Kerrville. He went to work for Charles Schreiner, making shingles and cutting timber. Since it was hard to get supplies, Schreiner got 2 freight wagons and 8 yoke of oxen, and sent Frank on 1 wagon and a man named Russell on the other, and they hauled freight from San Antonio. During this time, my mother lived in a 1-room log hut and had 1 girl, Chloe. Mother sewed and helped Schreiner's wife and learned lots of things to help in the house. They stayed there 3 years. They saved enough to buy a stock of hogs, so they moved near Barnett Springs, 5 miles from the head of the Pedernales River. He built a 2-room house of logs. At that time, he had 2 horses, 1 yoke of oxen, 2 cows, hogs, and 2 guns and a pistol. Their nearest neighbor lived on Spring Creek, 12 miles away. 2 months before their second child was born, his mother and father came to visit them and look at the country. They stayed with Frank until the boy was born. They named him Benjamin. In the meantime, they built a small house nearby and cleared a field for corn to make meal. The nearest mill for grinding corn was a settlement of Germans several miles to the east of them. The women would haul their corn to the mill in their oxen-drawn wagon, carrying their old muzzle-loading guns and children. The men stayed home and watched the hogs from the Indians and wild animals. What thoughts and fearful feelings those women must have had driving along, talking to Jerry and Roan, to G and Haw, seeing bear, antelope, deer, and wild cattle. But no Indians came near them. They camped one night, going and coming, and at night they could hear the wolves howling, screech owls calling, and the wild cattle would run up near their fire and stare at them, then break and run. They kept the fires burning all night, with one woman outside building fires, and one inside the wagon holding her gun to defend her little children, peering through the darkness and expecting to be surrounded every minute by howling savages. How long the night and how glorious was the light of day. When they got to the end of their trip, there was nothing but strange people who could not speak English, but they made the miller understand that they wanted their meal ground. How good that meal must have tasted that night. They had been living for days on parched corn. They would parch the corn, put it in a rag or sack, lay it on a rock, and then beat it with the back of the axe for the children. Poor women, or I should say brave women, to risk so much to get bread to eat. With no road, it took 5 days in all to make that trip. High grass and boulders to travel over, traveling by the sun, and hunting their crossings at Spring and Town Creek. One wonders if any women could do that now. I doubt it. They have to be raised from childhood to be brave and strong enough to endure such perilous experiences. 3 nights after the women made their last trip to Fredericksburg with their last corn, the Indians surrounded their place, killed their oxen, broke the hog pens, scattered the hogs, and killed them. Frank had built a pen that held 200 head at night. They herded for days. He had intended driving them to a coast town and sending them to a man to ship to market. The Indians came sometime after midnight and left at daylight. Present at this time were the Scott boys, Tom and Ike, Frank's brother, small boys who could shoot for the women. My mother molded the bullets and loaded the guns. The older women herded the children in a corner and pulled tables in front of the door and threw quilts and feather beds over them. The Indians could not get to the house to burn it. The men thought they killed a lot, shot them off their horses, but other Indians would run in and carry them off. The men always thought that the white men were leading the Indians. Well, they all disappeared from sight, and Frank opened the door. What a sight! Dead oxen, dead horses, and hogs everywhere. Everything was either dead or scattered. The men hunted for several days, but found only a few sows and pigs. Frank made his way by foot to Kerrville, and he got help to move and moved to Springs on Johnson's Creek, and took up a homestead there where his father would be near him. They lived there for 5 years and accumulated some stock. They cleared land for a garden and 5 acres for corn, and they lived there until the Civil War was about over. Enter Colonel James Duff. For some reason, my grandmother said his name was Captain Duffy, so as far as I'm concerned, that was his name. Captain Duffy and his cutthroats. 2 of Frank's brothers fought for the Southland, belonged to Hood's brigade. It was during this time that Captain Duffy and his cutthroats were sent out to round up and bushwhack the Union men. But the main thing they did was to rob, steal, and kill innocent men, and steal their women and ravage or mistreat them. Duffy served as commander of an irregular Texas Confederate military unit, Duff's Partisan Rangers. About this time, there were a lot of Union men sympathizers in the hill country, and their families would hide out. Duffy's men were making a raid on the men in hiding. Frank had accidentally shot himself in the foot. He had shot his big toe off, and consequently, he was at home at the time Duffy made the raid. By this time, another boy had been born to them, named Frank, who was 6 months old. Duffy took Frank and Old Man Henderson, a man 60 years old, with 2 more men as prisoners, out to a camp at a waterhole on the Divide, about 35 miles west of Fredericksburg. They took the women and children to headquarters at Fredericksburg and kept them in a 1-room hut and would not let them leave the hut unless they would ride with them. Meanwhile, Mother and the children had the measles. There were 10 people in that 1 room. Mother almost lost her mind with 3 children sick and had not heard a word in all that time from her husband. Now there were some good men in the bunch that had taken the oath or joined the band to save their lives or their families and would help the women when they could without detection. They were sorry for the women and were as kind to them as could be, but could not do much. One man named Banty told Mother that the captain had ordered those 4 men killed, as they would not take the oath, and they killed them and had thrown their bodies in Dead Man's Hole. The renegades had moved their camp nearer Fredericksburg. The women begged to be allowed to bury their dead. Duffy told them that if they would join the band, they could go bury the damned men. But Mother and her cousin would not do that, so the men would come one at a time and make proposals to them. Mother told them that when the next one came, she would scald him. They were not bothered for hours. Then, near dark, a man slipped up to the window and said, "Come on out, Mary, and go walking with me." She asked him to go away, but he wouldn't. Again, she said, "Go away," but he would not. He told her he would give her a fine horse, but she said, "No." He asked, "Why not? Your man is dead." Meanwhile, she had water hot, and she was so mad that when he started to climb through the window, she dashed hot water in his face. He fell out, howling. The others came running. Mother said she thought they would kill her, but they just laughed and howled and took him away. 2 of the women gave up, but Mother and her cousin would not. Those other women were kind and weak. They pleaded with the captain until he gave them a yoke of oxen and wagon and pick and shovel and some bedding and told them to go. At this time, Mother broke out with the measles and was sick, but was determined to bury her husband, so they got there the second night. What feelings of horror they must have had when they looked down into that hole and saw their loved ones floating around. They had only 2 jugs of water with them and 6 children to quench their thirst. They selected the place for burial and dug all night. They would take turns about. One would dig while the others lay down and rested. They finished the one big grave late the next evening. They waded into the hole up to their armpits, slipped a sheet under each body, 1 woman at each corner of the sheet, carried them out, and rolled them in the grave till all the bodies were in. They then said a prayer and filled the grave that night. The bodies were so swollen and black that none of the women could tell one body from the other except Mother, who knew Frank by his big toe being shot off. They got back to Fredericksburg on the 5th night. Mother was so sick that she knew very little of what went on. Her cousin Banty and the children were with her. The other women were with the men, she thought. The first thing she knew, she was at Old Man Scott's, her father-in-law. Her cousin said Bandy had brought them there and that Duffy was sending most of his men up on the Pecos to fight the Indians. But there were enough to worry the settlers. They would watch around Scott's house to see if they were feeding hideouts or men they were after. Mr. Scott told them that he would feed any hungry man. Scott was quite old and had a lot of friends. As time passed, the mother grew stronger. When the captain with his bodyguard took Scott, everybody feared he would be killed, but he was only questioned. Now here is where Captain Temple comes in. I just can't remember just who he was. I don't know if he was a Confederate or just who he was, but I know he was a brave man, a captain, and a man of fair education. He sent word to Duffy to free Scott, that if he harmed him in any way he would kill him. Duffy must have feared him, for he brought Scott home and ordered Mother to get dinner for him and his men. Mother got dinner, but as she had seen Temple slipping up behind the brush, she feared that he would shoot Duffy and there would be a fight right in the house among the children and some innocent person would be killed. She had hurried up to put dinner on the table. Duffy sat at the table with his back to the door with his bodyguard facing the door. Mother sent Duffy a knife by Chloe. He told the child he had a knife, but childlike she stood there, trying to get him to take it. Temple motioned to Mother to get Chloe out of the way, but Mother shook her head, no. The men had left their guns on the saddles of the horses in front of the door. She saw that Temple was going to the horses, so she walked out the door, stood there, looking out in a casual way, and looked back at the men in the room, as if she was watching to get them anything they needed. All the time she knew that the men were stealing their guns. Temple got 4 guns, but the 5th hung in the scabbard, and Horse reared up and snorted, but he got it out in time to throw his gun on the men as they rushed out. Mother grabbed 2 of their pistols as they rushed by her to see what was going on with the horses. When they saw it was Temple, they did not even try to shoot, but put their hands high. Duffy was scared and cursed his men because Temple had gotten the best of him. He begged Temple not to kill him. Temple told him that he would kill them all, Duffy first. He told Mother to hold the men with her pistol, but she said she was so scared that she said she would miss if she had to shoot. So Duffy said he would leave Old Man Scott alone and move his men away from there. Temple then got on Duffy's horse and Mother take the other two men's pistols, and then Temple made Duffy trot ahead of him with the other men riding ahead of Duffy. He made him trot for about 1/2 mile to where he had his horse hidden in the brush. He got down and got on his own horse and made Duffy get on his own. He then told Duffy to get going and stated, "If you bother these people again, I will kill you." As the men started off, he went to shooting, and the men fairly flew. They didn't bother the people there anymore, but they ran all the stock off, and they burned Mother's house down to the ground. There was nothing to go back for. She with her father-in-law then moved and settled a place on Onion Creek. There she met and married Father. A very short time later, he had left for Old Mexico to escape the Union soldiers. We always thought they were guerrillas. My mother, who was 25 years old at that time, was left with 7 children: William, John, Eunice, and Jake, her husband's children, and Chloe, Ben, and Frank, her own children. They had no easy time. Father meets Mama for the first time. Let's pick up where we left Father. He was struggling, doing the best he knew how, with his wife gone and taking care of 6 kids. Thank God for Elizabeth, or it would have been impossible. Anyway, at this time, Old Man Scott had returned, and Father went to see them. They were old people and might need help. That is how he and his mother met. The soldiers had killed her husband, Frank Scott, and burned the house, destroyed the crops, and drove off the milk cow. She and her 3 children, Chloe, age 8, Benjamin, age 5, and Frank, a baby in arms, were living about 25 miles above Kerrville on the Johnson Fork. She came back with her father-in-law to live, thinking she could be of some help. Father told her about the baby and the loss of his wife. When he left, he asked her to come and see the baby and see if they were feeding it properly, as it cried a lot. She went to see it, found nothing fixed, so she fixed a bottle with a goose quill nipple and showed Eunice how to use it. She took a long strip of soft cloth and wrapped it around a hollow piece of goose quill to fit the bottle like a stopper. She told her to give it to the baby every 2 hours. She felt so sorry for all of them. She wanted to go take care of them. He said people would talk, so he asked her to marry him. She said she didn't love him, but thought he would make a good father for her children. They went to Austin and were married in 1863. Mother had her spinning wheel and could weave cloth for the children's clothes. They were an average family. The boys were going to school. The 2 babies, Jake and Frank, were a few months apart in age, and they would roll and play on an old quilt on the floor. They were happy and getting along well. One night, one of the cows did not come up to be milked, and the next morning Father went to hunt her. About the middle of the evening, Mother saw what she took to be an old tramp. He stopped and asked for bread. She gave it to him, and he went down the road eating it. In about an hour, a bunch of soldiers came by and asked her if she had seen a man pass. She said, "Yes, a tramp asked for bread. He said he was starving. I gave him bread, and he went up the road towards Austin." They asked her if she knew it was against the law to feed deserters from the army. She told them he was not a soldier, just a tramp. They asked where her husband was, and she told them he was hunting their milk cow. They said they would like to talk to him when they came back, and went on towards Austin. However, they never returned. Mother was scared they would kill Father like they did her first husband, Frank Scott, so she begged him to leave and go to Old Mexico until the war was settled. He didn't want to leave and go with all the children to raise. She told him they would carry on as well as they could, and it would be better for him to be gone for a while than to be gone forever. Reluctantly, he agreed. He told her he wanted a small bag of provisions and a change of clothes. He said he had met Lewis Nelson, and Lewis was going to Mexico and taking his family. He said that he would go with Lewis, so he left walking. He was a great hand for walking. So this concludes part 1 of my story, The Past Happenings. I hope you will stay for part 2. There are stories of blizzards, Sam Bass, Texas Rangers, panthers, cowards, house floating down rivers, so I hope you will stay with me to the end. Also, if you've enjoyed my story so far, I hope you will like and subscribe. That way, when I upload the next video, you'll be notified. So, bye-bye for now.